The morning I found out my husband had been lying to me, I was holding a mop, not metaphorically, an actual mop wrung out over a yellow bucket in the hallway of the Hargrove Inn, 3rd floor, East Wing. The smell of pine cleaner was so strong it burned the back of my throat. My shift had started at 6. It was barely 8:30, and my feet already hurt. I remember thinking as I pushed that mop across the tile that this was not the life I had imagined for myself at 29. But then again, nobody imagines this. You don't grow up picturing yourself cleaning strangers' bathrooms before the sun gets high. You just end up there, one decision at a time, one bad month leading into the next, until one day you look up and you're in a hallway that smells like pine cleaner, and you can't quite remember how you got there. My husband's name is Everett. We'd been married 4 years when the accident happened. He worked construction, project management, mostly, which meant he wasn't supposed to be on the actual site all that often. But that Thursday in February, he was. A section of scaffolding gave way. He fell about 12 feet. When the paramedics got to him, he couldn't feel his legs. I got the call while I was at the grocery store. I remember standing in the cereal aisle with a box of granola in my hand, and the store kept going on around me. A kid crying somewhere, a cart with a squeaky wheel, and the voice on the phone was telling me something about my husband in a hospital, and I just kept thinking, I need to put this granola back. I need to put it back in the right place, or someone will find it in the wrong aisle, and they'll have to restock it, and that's extra work for somebody. I don't know why that was the thing my brain landed on. But that's what shock does, I think. It makes you focus on something small so you don't have to look at the big thing directly. I drove to St. Benedict's in a kind of trance. By the time I got there, Everett was already out of the emergency room and being assessed by a spinal specialist. His mother, Fiona, was already in the waiting area when I arrived. She'd beaten me there, which I didn't think too much about at the time. She lived close to the hospital. It made sense. What didn't make sense was the way she looked at me when I walked in. Not like I was her son's wife who needed comfort. More like I was someone who had shown up uninvited. The doctors told us the injury was serious but incomplete, meaning there was some nerve function preserved, which was better than the alternative, but it would take months to understand the full picture. There would be surgery. There would be rehabilitation. There would be time, and more time. And through all of it, they said, his recovery would depend enormously on his circumstances at home. His circumstances at home were me. I want to be clear about something. Because I think it matters, I didn't resent him for the accident. Not for a single second. It wasn't his fault. These things happen on job sites even when people are careful, and Everett was careful. The scaffolding failed. That was all. What I did resent, quietly in the way you resent things you're not allowed to say out loud, was the money. Everett's employer carried workers' compensation insurance. I learned very quickly in the weeks after the accident that workers' comp doesn't work the way you hope it does. There were disputes about the circumstances. There were forms that got lost. There was a claims adjuster who kept calling me back to clarify things and then never actually calling back. What we did receive covered a portion of his lost wages, but nowhere near all of it. And the surgery, the specific procedure his spinal surgeon recommended, was only partially covered under the plan his employer carried. The gap was significant. I did the math on a Tuesday night while Everett slept. I sat at our kitchen table with a notepad and a calculator, and I added up what we had coming in and what we owed and what we were going to owe, and then I sat there for a long time just looking at the number. I thought about asking Fiona. I want to be honest about this part too. Fiona had money. Not extravagant money, but comfortable money. Her late husband had left her a house that was paid off and a retirement account that was healthy. She never worked when her kids were young, and she'd lived simply since her husband passed. She could have helped. I thought about asking. I turned the words over in my head for days. I imagined sitting down with her, showing her the numbers, asking if she could contribute something toward the surgery. I imagined it so many times that it almost felt like I had done it. But I hadn't, and here's why. The way she looked at me in that waiting room had never quite left me. And I was afraid that asking would give her an opening to say something that I wouldn't be able to unhear. So I didn't ask. I found another way. The Hargrove Inn wasn't my first choice. It wasn't even my fifth. I applied to 12 places before they called me back. Part-time housekeeping, mornings, Monday through Friday. The pay wasn't remarkable, but it was consistent and it was immediate, and I could be home by early afternoon when the visiting nurse finished with Everett. That was the shape of my life for almost 5 months. Wake up at 5, drive to the hotel, clean rooms, drive home, help with Everett's exercises, make dinner, sleep, do it again. Fiona came over twice a week, ostensibly to help. What she actually did was rearrange things in my kitchen and make comments about the way I was managing Everett's diet. And sometimes, if I'd had a long day and my patience was thin, ask pointed questions about whether I'd looked into other options. Other options. As if I hadn't been doing nothing but looking into other options since February. She never offered money. Not once. I stopped expecting her to somewhere around the 3rd month. The morning everything changed was a Thursday in July. I'd been at the hotel since 6, same as always. My cart was loaded up with towels and cleaning supplies, and I was working my way down the 3rd floor hallway when my supervisor, a woman named Dolores, poked her head out of the linen room and told me room 318 had been a late checkout. Guests had just left. Could I get to it as soon as possible because they had another party checking in that afternoon? I said sure. I finished the room I was in, changed my gloves, grabbed fresh linens, and wheeled my cart down to 318. The door was propped open. I knocked anyway, the way you do, and called out housekeeping, and when there was no answer, I went in. The room smelled like someone had been there recently. Coffee, a little bit. Something else. A cologne, I knew. I stopped moving. The bed was made, but not by housekeeping. It had been pulled together hastily, the way someone does it when they're trying to leave a room looking less disturbed than it was. One of the pillows had a dent that hadn't been fluffed out. There were 2 glasses on the nightstand. Both of them had been used. My brain did the same thing it had done in the cereal aisle. It went somewhere small. I noticed that one of the glasses had a lipstick mark on the rim. I thought, I'll need to note that for inventory. I thought, that's a nice shade of red. Then I walked to the bathroom to check what needed replacing, and on the edge of the sink, just sitting there, like it was nothing, was a watch. A steel-banded watch with a small scratch on the face, right above the 6. I had put that scratch there. 3 years ago, moving furniture. I knew that watch, the way I knew my own hands. I picked it up. I turned it over. There was nothing written on the back, no engraving, nothing that would prove to anyone else what I already knew. But I knew. I stood in that bathroom for what felt like a very long time. Then I put the watch in my apron pocket, finished the room, made a note on my clipboard, and went back to my cart. I worked the rest of my shift. I don't know how. My hands kept doing the job, stripping beds, wiping surfaces, restocking the little soaps, while some other part of me was somewhere completely else, running calculations. Not financial ones this time. He wasn't supposed to be able to walk. That was the word they used early on, supposed to. The doctors had been careful not to make promises either way. There was function preserved, but how much would return and on what timeline, they couldn't say. What I knew was that for 5 months, Everett had been mostly in a wheelchair at home, doing his exercises, using a walker for short distances. He tired easily. He needed help with stairs. He needed help with a lot of things. And yet, someone who needed help with stairs had gotten himself to the 3rd floor of a hotel. I drove home that afternoon with the watch on the passenger seat. I kept glancing at it at red lights. By the time I pulled into our street, I'd had the entire conversation in my head 3 times, and I still didn't know how to start it out loud. Everett was in the living room when I came in. The TV was on, some home renovation show he'd gotten into since the accident. He turned when he heard the door. "Hey," he said. "You're home early." I wasn't home early. I was home at the exact same time I always was. He just hadn't been paying close enough attention to know that. I set my bag down on the table. I didn't say anything for a moment. I took the watch out of my apron pocket and put her on the table between us. He looked at it, then he looked at me. "Housekeeping called me in for room 318 this morning," I said. "Late checkout." He was quiet. The guest left a few things behind. His jaw moved, but nothing came out. "Everett," I said, "I need you to tell me what was happening in that room." What he told me over the next half hour came out in pieces. He'd been regaining more function than he'd let on. Not full function, not by a long shot, but more than he told me. He could walk short distances with a cane. He'd been hiding the extent of his improvement because, and this was the part that he seemed to genuinely believe made sense, he was afraid that if I knew he was getting better, I'd leave. I need you to sit with that for a second because I had to. He thought I was staying because he needed me. He thought the second he didn't need me anymore, I would walk out the door. So he had been performing a level of incapacity he no longer fully had so that I would stay. And the woman in the room, her name was Adrienne. She worked for a company that specialized in adaptive rehabilitation. He'd found her through a contact his physical therapist had given him. She had been coming to the hotel, which he'd chosen specifically because it wasn't somewhere I'd ever go, to work with him on mobility exercises he hadn't told me about because he hadn't told me about the improvement. It was easier, he said, to do it where you wouldn't see. I asked him why he hadn't just told me the truth. He said he didn't know how. I asked him how many months he had been hiding this. He said about 3. 3 months. For 3 months, while I was getting up at 5 in the morning and scrubbing strangers' toilets to pay for a surgery he needed, he had been meeting another woman in the hotel room to do physical therapy in secret, because he was afraid of what would happen if I saw that he was okay. I didn't yell. I want people to understand that. I didn't yell because I was so far past yelling that I had come out somewhere quiet on the other side of it. I said, I need you to be honest with me about one thing. He said, okay. I said, is that all it was? He said, yes. He said Adrienne was his therapist and nothing else had ever happened, and he was sorry. He was so sorry. He knew how it looked, and he knew what he'd done, and he was sorry. I looked at him for a long time. I thought about what it meant that he had trusted his own fear more than he had trusted me. I thought about 5 months of 5 a.m. wake-ups and pine cleaner, and Fiona rearranging my kitchen. I thought about the watch on the table. Fiona knew? I said. He hesitated. Just 1 second, but I caught it. She knew you were improving, I said. It wasn't a question. I needed someone to know, he said, in case something happened while I was out. So his mother had known for 3 months that her son was walking short distances and meeting a therapist in a hotel, while I was working to pay for surgery and helping him in and out of the wheelchair, and she had said nothing. She had come over twice a week and watched me do all of it and said nothing. I picked up my bag. I picked up my keys. Where are you going? He asked. I don't know yet, I said. I drove to my sister Paulette's house. She took one look at me when she opened the door and didn't ask any questions. Just stepped aside and let me in and put the kettle on. I sat at her kitchen table and told her everything, and when I was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "What do you want to do?" Not what should I do. What do I want to do? I sat with that for a while. Here's what I knew by the time the tea was cold. I was not going to make a decision about my marriage that night. I was not going to blow everything up in the first hour of being angry. I had learned by then that the things you do in that first hour are not always the things you actually want. They're just the things you want right now. But I also knew some things had to change. I stayed at Paulette's for 3 nights. Everett called twice a day, every day. I answered on the 4th day. We talked for 2 hours. The kind of talking that goes in circles for a while before it finally hits the thing underneath everything else. What was underneath for him was a terror he'd been carrying since he fell. The absolute certainty that his value to me was in what he could do, and that a version of himself that couldn't walk, couldn't work, couldn't provide, was a version I would leave. He had never said this out loud to me. He had been living inside that fear for 5 months, and it had made him do something dishonest. I understood it. Understanding it didn't make it okay. What I told him when we finally got to the part that mattered was this. You don't get to decide who I am and then act on that version. You don't get to assume I'll leave and treat me like I'm already gone. That's not love. That's just managing something you're scared of. He didn't have an answer for that. Which, honestly, was the right response. I came home on the 5th day. Before I walked in, I went to Fiona's. I drove to her house and rang the doorbell, and when she answered, I told her I needed to say something and I was going to say it once. I said, "You knew. You let me work that job and take care of your son, and you let me believe things were one way when they weren't, and you didn't say a single word to me. I want you to understand that I'm not going to forget that. I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen to keep the peace. If you want to be part of this family going forward, you're going to treat me like someone who deserves to know the truth about her own life." She opened her mouth. I said, "I'm not asking you to respond right now. I just needed you to hear it." And then I left. That was 4 months ago. Everett finished his course of rehabilitation, the real one, the official one, not the hotel sessions. He walks with a cane most days. Some days are better than others. The surgery happened in September and the surgeon said it went as well as they could have hoped, and we are now on the other side of something I wouldn't wish on anyone. The workers' situation eventually resolved, partially, not fully, but enough to relieve some of the pressure. I left the Hargrove Inn in August. I cried a little walking out of there for the last time, which surprised me. Not because I was going to miss it, but because of everything that building had held for me. The months of early mornings, the cart with the wobbly wheel on the 3rd floor that I'd reported 4 times and they'd never fixed. The day I found the watch. Fiona and I have reached something that isn't quite warmth, but isn't the cold silence it was before either. She came to dinner last month. She didn't rearrange anything in my kitchen. I noticed, and I appreciated it more than I would have expected. Everett and I go to couples counseling on Thursday evenings. It is not always comfortable. The therapist asks questions that neither of us always wants to answer. But we go every week and we stay in the room and we try to tell the truth, which is harder than it sounds and more necessary than I understood before all of this. What I know now, and I'm still figuring out how to hold it without it being too heavy, is that the person you're most afraid of losing can sometimes be the person doing the most damage, not out of cruelty but out of fear, and that you can love someone and still require them to be honest with you. Those two things don't cancel each other out, they have to exist together or nothing works. I still drive past the Hargrove Inn sometimes. 3rd floor east wing. I don't stop. But I think about that hallway more than I'd like to admit. The pine cleaner, the wobbly cart, the door of 318 propped open, the watch on the edge of the sink. Some mornings, that's where I still am. Standing in that bathroom, holding something in my hand that I recognized immediately and couldn't look away from, trying to decide what to do with the truth once you have it. I decided to keep it. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened, not in a grand philosophical way, just in the quiet, practical way you think about things when you're washing dishes at night and your mind goes somewhere on its own. Everett made a choice. He chose to hide his progress from me because he was afraid of what I'd do with the truth, and that choice, made out of fear, not cruelty, set off a chain of things he couldn't have predicted. It brought me to that hotel room. It put that watch in my hand. It forced a conversation that probably needed to happen whether we wanted it to or not. Fear, when you feed it in secret, doesn't stay small. It grows into the exact thing you are trying to prevent. That's not a lesson I read somewhere. That's just what I watched happen in my own living room over the course of about 30 minutes on a Thursday afternoon. And Fiona. I've thought about her too, maybe more than I expected to. She knew. She sat across from me at my own kitchen table, twice a week, and said nothing. I think she told herself she was protecting her son. I think she genuinely believed that. But protecting someone by letting someone else be deceived, that's not loyalty. That's just choosing who matters more. And the cost of that choice was something she's going to have to reckon with in her own way, in her own time. I'm not carrying it for her. What I learned about myself through all of this is something I'm still sorting out. I used to think that being strong meant not needing anything from anyone. Getting up early, doing the job, handling it, not complaining, I was proud of that. I thought it made me reliable. What I didn't realize was that I had also made myself into someone who could be lied to more easily, because I wasn't asking questions, wasn't expecting to be consulted, wasn't leaving room for honesty to find its way in. I had pulled the door almost closed without meaning to. Strength, I think now, isn't the same as silence. It's not the same as endurance. Real strength is staying in the room when things get hard to look at. It's picking up the watch and not putting it back down. It's driving to Fiona's house and saying the thing you need to say, once, clearly, and then leaving. It's sitting in a therapist's office on Thursday evenings even when you'd rather be anywhere else because you decided the truth mattered more than comfort. Paulette asked me, that first night, what I wanted, not what I should do. What I wanted. I didn't have an answer right away. But that question opened something, because I had spent 5 months focused entirely on what needed to happen: the surgery, the bills, the recovery. And I had stopped asking what I actually wanted out of any of it. What I wanted was a marriage where I didn't have to find out the truth in a hotel room, where I could be trusted with the real version of things, even the scary version. Where the person I chose also chose me back. Fully, honestly, not just in the easy moments. That's still what I want, and we're still working toward it. Some things take longer to recover from than a spinal injury, but if Everett and I have learned anything from this year, it's that you don't get to skip the hard part. You just have to decide whether to go through it together or alone. We chose together. Most days that still feels like the right call.